As you're getting your stuff together, I want you to think about how many hours you're going to spend during your lifetime working. Have you ever calculated how much time you might spend at work? I am not a mathematician, but I did crunch some numbers. If you work on average 40 hours a week, okay, we're just speaking in averages here, and if you work on average 50 weeks a year, we're at 2,000 hours of work per year. And then if you work from age 20 to age 65, and you just take those 45 years, that's 90,000 hours. That's a long time. That's a lot of hours. In fact, that's 3,750 24-hour cycles. So if you just took days and stacked them 24 hours in a row, it'd be 3,750 days until you got through all of the time that you're going to spend working in your lifetime. That's a long time. A major chunk of your life is spent working. And the crazy thing is, a lot of people go through their working years miserable at their job, having a bad attitude about their job, idolizing their job, being lazy at their job, and missing what God calls us to do when it comes to work. It's worth spending some time to think about here tonight. Work is not only something that you do for a major chunk of your years on planet Earth, but it also has a major impact on the person that you're here with tonight. Right? Your marriages are significantly impacted by your attitude at work, your production at work, your lack of production at work, and so on. So many different aspects of this. It's worth pausing to spend some time to think about what it means to work like a Christian. How do you work like a Christian? I want to answer that question tonight, and I want you to leave here understanding what it means to work like a Christian. Our kids, at least one of mine today, has a memory verse that is our text for today. Colossians 3:23. It tells us, in part, what it means to work like a Christian. Colossians 3:23, maybe you memorized this when you were in Awana. Maybe you've read this 1,000 times. But I think there's some stuff we need to learn from it tonight. It says, whatever you do, work heartily, as for the Lord and not for men. So our kids are looking at that tonight, and I think we should too. And the passage doesn't stop there. In fact, the sentence doesn't end with a period there at the end of verse 23. Yet that's maybe the passage that we memorize or that we quote, and we stop. It has more to say, and this makes a big difference. So whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord, not for men, comma, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. For the wrongdoer will be paid back for the wrong he has done, and there is no partiality. Verses 24 and 25 add a kick that we need and some motivation for us to work heartily, some direction for what we do when we go about working heartily, and I want to look at that with you tonight, okay? So what does it mean to work like a Christian? Point number one, if you got notes in front of you, you can write this down. First, work for God. Work for God. Our passage says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord. Right there in verse 23, work for the Lord. So really, maybe the question here is, in your job, at your work, who are you working to benefit? And at a surface level, whatever company you work for, you're working to benefit that company. Maybe you're self-employed, you're working to benefit yourself, your company. I work for the church. When I was in high school, I worked for Lake Mission Viejo. I worked to benefit Lake Mission Viejo and all the people who would come. Everyone in the room works for someone or some organization. Every single person here has some form of job, responsibility, and they work for someone at a surface level. But our passage here today calls us to a higher standard. If you're a Christian, you work for a higher authority than the surface level that we just described. If you're a Christian, you also work for God, to serve God, to benefit God, to use that sort of language. So when we view our work as for God, I think it really changes what motivates us to work and to do a good job. This higher standard and higher authority and higher boss ultimately really ought to change why we go to work and what motivates us to work. So I made a chart for you. There are higher motivations when you become a Christian. And so this was some of the ways I was thinking about this. Here you have a Thrive guy, evidenced by the Thrive flame on the t-shirt. You like that attention to detail there? Kristen, Roush for the win. Okay. Here are a Thrive guy. Here's some motivations for work. At the first level, the level that I just described at the surface level, you have a few different motivations that could drive you to work. Go ahead and put the first one on there. Money, right? Maybe one motivation for you to go to work or people that you work with, their motivation is to get that paycheck. There's other surface level motivations like, it's the next one, fulfillment. Maybe you go to your job, and what really motivates you to go and to work is you find a sense of fulfillment in what you do, and it's rewarding, and so you go and you work. There's other reasons. Maybe you work or you're motivated to work just because of obligation. It's like, I have to. If I had my choice, I would not work, but I need to, so I go. Hit me with the next one. Maybe you get recognition at your job. Maybe you get recognition or popularity or appreciation in your workplace, and that really motivates you to go and to work. There's another distraction. I don't know. We can come up with more, and you can brainstorm more in your group, but maybe work is just a place for you to go and escape other distractions in life, and you get your mind off of other burdens, and you check out of things that you otherwise think about. There are a number of surface level, or I guess I called them level 1 motivations for work. And if you're not a Christian, you better pick one of those that really fulfills you for your lifetime, because one of these things is what you get from your job in order to drive you to keep going. If you are a Christian, you can't be content with being motivated by level 1 motivations. Look at level 2. In our text, it says, if you're a Christian, work heartily for the Lord. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. So hit me with it. So the passage calls us to work to serve God. That's a higher motivation. To work for the maker of the universe. And the passage goes on, verse 24, verse 25, to give a couple more things. Hit me with the next one. To be rewarded by God. The text uses this language in verse 24. Do you see it there? Knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. And then, the opposite, warning to avoid punishment by God, because the text says, for the wrongdoer will be paid back for the wrong he has done. And so what we're calling this is level 2 motivations. And if you're a Christian here today, I think what our text calls us to is to be motivated to work for the Lord, which means being motivated to work to serve God, to be rewarded by God. He's watching, he rewards you, and to avoid being punished by God. And I think what we find is when we are motivated to work for God, we do find that the paychecks still come, hopefully. There is fulfillment. We do have the responsibility and obligation of going to work, but all of the things on level one can be injected with a whole lot of meaning and value and significance because we're working to serve the Lord. The Bible calls Christians to work for a higher authority. It's not just about making money and finding fulfillment in your job. There's more. And so, if we look at verse 24, you ought to be someone who, as you go about your work for the Lord, you anticipate a reward. You anticipate a reward. So you can go back to point number 1 on our slide here. Some subpoints on here. Anticipate the reward. Turn to Ephesians chapter 1, verse 18. What is this reward that we're talking about? What is the inheritance? Well, Paul just in the letter right before this one, or 2 before this one, says in verse 18, Ephesians 1:18. Actually, if we start in verse 15, he is praying for the faith of the Ephesians. Verse 17, that the God of the Lord Jesus Christ, Father of glory, may give you the spirit of wisdom and revelation and the knowledge of him. Verse 18, having the eyes of your hearts enlightened, so that you may know what is the hope to which he has called you, what are the riches of his glorious inheritance in the saints, the immeasurable greatness of his power toward those of us who believe. So we pause right there. What this passage is saying is Paul is saying, hey, I'm praying that the eyes of your heart would be enlightened so that you would see, and you would come to understand what is this inheritance that you look forward to one day. There is this forward, future anticipation of an inheritance that every Christian has and ought to be gripped by and motivated by. And in Colossians chapter 3, the way we go about our work is attached to the kind of inheritance that we have. Now, there's certain unchangeable characteristics of our inheritance that we learn through the rest of the pages of the New Testament. It's imperishable, it's undefiled, it's unfading, it's kept in heaven for you. Like, if you're a Christian, there's an inheritance to look forward to. But our text says we need to work in such a way that we are rewarded with this inheritance. And that ought to be motivating for us. God will reward you for the way you go about your work. I don't know if we think about it that way all the time, but we ought to. A baby, if you're a full-time mom, stay-at-home mom, you have an infant in your home, a baby will never thank you for changing their diaper the 1,000th time. The baby will never give you a paycheck for feeding them every single day. The baby will never compliment you for reading them another book. Over and over again, there's so many aspects of this job that you do with zero reward from the person that you're serving directly. But you have 100% confidence that God is watching the way you conduct yourself at your job, moms, and will reward you. And there's no question about whether or not he will. God will reward you with this thing that we're calling an inheritance. You might not get paid as much as you deserve. You might not get as many thank yous at your job as you deserve. You might not get as much recognition as you ought in your workplace. But you can be sure that God is watching the way you work and will reward those who work heartily for him. You might not have any inheritance stored up for you on planet Earth. Maybe there's no big inheritance you're going to get at any point in your life. but every Christian in the room who works for God will receive an inheritance. In Colossians chapter 3, it goes on to say, not only are you going to be rewarded, but, as we read, the wrongdoer will be paid back for the wrong he has done, and there's no partiality. Paul uses that same word, to be paid back for, in one other text, and it's in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. I want to turn there. Turn to 2 Corinthians 5, because I think this helps us understand what it means to be paid back for the wrong that Christians do. You don't lose your salvation. You don't lose your inheritance. But 2 Corinthians chapter 5, look at verse 10. We Christians must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil. So there's a judgment day, and the way you go about your work is part of the evaluation. Have you made that connection and realized I'm working for God, and he's going to reward me, and he's also watching and evaluating the manner in which I go about working, the attitude I bring into my work. There's a lot of ways to be a wrongdoer in our jobs, isn't there? There's a lot of ways to do it wrong. Being frustrated and bitter about what you have to do. Being motivated by strictly vain aspects of level 1. Idolizing your work. Not working heartily. There's a lot of ways that we can do this wrong. Obviously, cheating, working dishonestly, getting away with things that our boss doesn't see. God absolutely sees. Skimping, doing it halfway, taking the easy route every time, being more concerned about your boss or the people you work with and their opinions of you than God who's watching. There's a lot of ways to do it wrong. And I don't think that we think about this as often as we should. God's watching, and he cares about the way I work. And I'm going to give an account for it one day. So, yes, Colossians 3:23 is good. Let's memorize it. Verse 24 and 25 are also really good and really helpful for us to understand the way we ought to go about doing verse 23. And some motivations built into it. So work for God. We've identified the ultimate object or person that we work for, and now we need to talk about how we should do that. And so if we take a step back, in the middle of verse 23, look at what it says. Colossians 3:23. We just basically focused on the part that says working for God and then everything that follows. One step back from there, whatever you do, work heartily. Work heartily. This tells us a little bit about how we ought to go about our jobs to do that in a way that's pleasing to the Lord. So point number 2 is to work with heart. Work with heart. When I worked at Lake Mission Viejo, my first job when I was in high school, my motivations and the way I went about my job, I really wanted to get paid. I wanted that paycheck. I really wanted to get tan. I was a lifeguard, so I got to walk around, get tan. That was Bethany? All right, good. Yep. I wanted to cruise around on the boat, so we got to do patrol. So 8-hour shift, 4 hours of that was spent cruising around on a Boston whaler in Lake Mission Viejo, and just waiting for someone to flip over in their kayak so we could floor it and fly across the lake to say, hey, don't do that again. And that was about it. But if you do it again, we'll get to fly across the lake and tell you not to do it again. I really was, concerned about what I got from the job in a lot of ways, upon reflection. Not as much about what I gave to the job, what I contributed to the job, the way I went about doing my work. And I think that's what this text calls us to, is the way we go about doing our work needs to be done with heart. That's the center of who we are, the core of our person, our inner man. We need to work from our hearts out. Give yourself to your work because of who you're serving. Every job and every task has meaning and significance because of who we're working for, and so we can work with heart in everything we do, in our jobs, and in all of our work. And the reason this might be a struggle is because of sin. And I know that's stating the obvious, but let me explain why I was thinking about this. Work is not bad. Work was created before the fall. Work was a good thing God created to have for people to do. It's a gift. And Satan would love it if you hated your job, wouldn't he? If our passage says to work heartily for the Lord, wouldn't it be a major win if you were frustrated every day about what you had to do? You were bitter and complained about your job, your work. Satan wants you to work half-heartedly. You're probably tempted every day to work half-heartedly in some capacity. Are you aware of that? Are you aware that it's a win for Satan when you bring these sorts of attitudes and half-heartedness into your job? God has called you to work with heart. Give yourself to what he's called you to do. It has significance and value because of who you're working for at level 2. Back at verse 23, Colossians 3, it says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. And so point number 3, if you want to work like a Christian, is to work for God with heart everywhere. Everywhere. The text says, whatever you do, do it in the ways that we've described. So we've worked backwards through this text to the very beginning to see that everywhere we go, we need to work in this sort of way. And that means that every place is a workplace. It's whatever you do. Work heartily. It is not limited to your 9-to-5 job or your proper job. It's everything that you do. This is all-encompassing. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that husbands in the room, your job does not end when you come home at the end of the day. It just changes. You come home to a different workplace, and we need to work in our home and lead in our homes. Whatever you do, whether you're at your 9-to-5 or whether you're at your house. And then this passage says it's more than that too. It's not just at your work, it's not just at your house, it's whatever you do. Work with heart for the Lord. Serve the Lord. Some of you know we moved into a house in the summer, and there are a lot of projects that we did right when we moved in, and there are some that we still haven't gotten to, and we're kind of at that place where it's like there's still a lot on the to-do list, and the production has really slowed down. And as I was writing this, I was thinking, getting convicted, thinking through whatever I do. I need to do it with heart to the Lord. Just knowing there's so many unfinished jobs at my house right now. But there's this one in particular that I was convicted about, and I want to share it with you. One of the projects from our house is the master bathroom sink. There's 2 sinks. The one that needs work is mine. And it's terrible. It's from the day we moved in. It doesn't drain. And in order to keep my beard looking nice and groomed, I got to shave, I got to trim, and so there's like beard clippings. This is too much information maybe for some. There's beard trimmings in the sink. You know, it's terrible. You can just picture it. It's terrible. And the sink just doesn't drain. And so it just gets like piled up and stuck on the sides. And I'm just thinking, I have not taken the time to get down under there and try to figure out what's going on. And I'm thinking, I got to work heartily, even on that drain. And the master bathroom, it's not really something that you're probably going to see even if you come over to my house. I hope. You're not going to be going upstairs to my master bathroom, checking things out. How's it going here? You know, like, no one really is going to see that. Yet here I am convicted because it's like, whatever you do, work heartily for the Lord. God sees that sink, and I haven't put any effort into it. And the other person who's amening in the back right now is my wife. Right? I know. We haven't talked about this. We haven't talked about this at all. We haven't talked about this example. We've talked about the sink a lot of times. But I was feeling convicted about it today because not only does God see the sink, even if you never do, my wife does. And this could be one huge way that I love and serve and work for my wife to really care for her in that way. And so I need to get under there and try to figure out what's going on with that sink. Okay? You all heard me say it. I do think that we all go to great lengths to work really hard at something in our lives. And every person in the room probably has something that they really go after. And maybe for you it's your job, maybe it's your hobby, but there's something that you're passionate about, that you work hard and that you really give yourself to. I don't know what that is that comes to your mind, but chances are it's not everything, which is kind of what the passage calls us to do, right? I mean, you probably go to, if work is that thing, you go to work, you work hard, you do a good job, and then there's other areas of your life that you don't give the same level of effort and heart to. And so maybe there are other areas of your life that suffer. I don't think this is calling us to spend the same amount of hours on everything that we do and equally spend the same amount of energy on everything that we do. Obviously, there's limitations to time and space, but when we're on a task, when we're doing something, we ought to give it our hearts. And I think that's part of the Christian work ethic here. And I think that, just husbands, I think that includes working really hard, doing a really good job at your job, and thinking, planning, working really hard in every other context, including your household. I mean, we spend time planning, strategizing, putting things on the calendar, talking to people, working at work. Let's bring that into our homes, into our marriages, into our families, and bring some planning and strategizing and leadership into our homes. Maybe this all sounds totally exhausting and like the bar is incredibly high. And then to that, I say good, because I think that's what the passage calls us to. This is a high bar, is it not? I mean, did you read that? This is a really high bar. This is hard, but this is so good. And I think to work like this, to live like this, makes you a light in the world. And I think there is a lot of fulfillment in working this way, because this is the way God calls us to work. And so I think learning all this from this passage is really good for each of us individually, and it matters how each of us work individually. But as I mentioned at the beginning, this really has a major effect, as we all understand, on our relationships that are represented here in the room, our marriages here. Work can be one of those major issues in your marriage. And so let's think about it, let's talk about it tonight, and let's try to work like Christians.